never thought I would live to see the day when my own flesh and blood would leave me out of one of the most important occasions of their life. But life has a way of surprising you, sometimes in the most painful ways. My name is Mary. I am 73 years old, and I have spent most of my life here in Arizona, under the wide skies and the endless sun, raising my family, working hard, and trying to hold together the pieces of a life that was never very easy, but always filled with love. I was born in a small desert town not far from Tucson, and all my life I believed family was everything. My husband, God rest his soul, and I raised 3 children, and through thick and thin, I gave them all I could. When he passed away 10 years ago, I became both mother and father, grandmother and guardian, a silent presence that kept everyone tied to their roots. I always imagined that when the time came for weddings and celebrations, I would be there front and center, smiling proudly, watching my grandchildren walk into the next chapter of their lives. But that's not what happened. It all began with my granddaughter, Emily. She was the light of my life. I remember the first time I held her, a tiny pink bundle with the brightest eyes I had ever seen, and I promised myself I would always be there for her. Through her childhood, I was the one who babysat her when her parents worked late. I was the one who baked her birthday cakes and sewed her dresses for school plays. I was the one who listened when she was a teenager, confused and heartbroken over her first crush. She used to say to me, "Grandma, you're my best friend." I carried those words like treasures in my heart. That's why when I found out she was getting married, I knew that I would be there. But weeks went by, and I heard nothing. No phone call, no letter, no invitation. I asked my daughter, Emily's mother, if there had been some mistake. She said gently, almost avoiding my eyes, "Mom, it's just going to be a small ceremony, mostly they're friends, not too much family." I nodded, but deep down something twisted inside me. Not too much family? Was I not family? Did I not raise her mother? Did I not cradle Emily in my arms and dry her tears? I told myself not to overthink it, that surely my invitation would arrive late, that perhaps it got lost in the mail. But then one afternoon, while shopping for groceries, I ran into an old neighbor who smiled and said, "I heard Emily's big day is coming up. Must be exciting for you to see your granddaughter walk down the aisle." My stomach dropped. She knew about it. The whole town knew about it. And yet, I hadn't been told a thing. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, staring at the wall, wondering what I had done wrong. Had I said something to upset her? Had I failed her in some way? Memories kept flashing through my mind, me teaching her how to make tortillas, her laughter as we played card games, her little arms around my neck whispering she loved me. How could all that suddenly mean nothing? Days later, I overheard by accident. Emily's wedding was to be held in Phoenix, at a fancy hall near downtown. I felt anger, betrayal, and sorrow all at once. I could have sat back, swallowed the hurt, and stayed home like a forgotten old woman. But something inside me refused to be erased so easily. If my granddaughter thought she could start her new life by pretending I didn't exist, she was wrong. I told myself, if they won't invite me, then I will go anyway, and not quietly, not as a shadow at the back, but as someone who had every right to be there. After all, I had earned that right with every meal I cooked, every sleepless night I spent caring for her, every prayer I whispered for her happiness. So I made my decision. I was going to crash that wedding. In the days leading up to the wedding, I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. I had never done anything like this before in my life. I was always the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who never caused trouble. But I realized that if I sat at home while everyone else celebrated, It would not just break my heart, it would make me invisible. I had been fading into the background of my family's life for years, and this was the final push that made me say no more. I went to my little closet and pulled out the nicest dress I owned. It was a soft lavender color, one I had worn only once before, at my grandson's graduation. I touched the fabric and thought, this will do. I also took out my old pearl necklace, a gift from my husband on our 25th anniversary. I wanted to carry a piece of him with me that day, as though he could stand by my side when I walked into that hall. For days I practiced what I might say if someone asked me why I was there. I imagined the shock on Emily's face when she saw me, the whispers among her friends, maybe even the anger for my daughter. But I told myself, better anger than silence, better confrontation than being forgotten. On the morning of the wedding, I woke before sunrise. The Arizona sky was painted in soft pinks and oranges, and I took it as a sign. I brewed my coffee, sat on my porch, and prayed for strength. Lord, give me the courage to face whatever comes, I whispered. I packed my small handbag with tissues, a little makeup, and the invitation I never received but had written for myself. On a piece of plain white paper, I had scribbled, Mary Johnson, grandmother of the bride. It was my way of reminding myself that I belonged there, no matter what anyone said. The drive to Phoenix took me 2 hours. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I followed the directions I had written down. I passed long stretches of desert, cactus standing tall against the sun, and I thought about all the miles I had walked in my life, all the sacrifices I had made for my family. Each mile brought me closer to the hall and closer to the truth. When I finally arrived, I parked a little far from the main entrance, not wanting anyone to see me right away. The building was grand, with white columns and strings of flowers decorating the entrance. I could hear faint music drifting out, the kind that makes your heart ache because it feels like it belongs to moments you were never invited to. For a moment, I sat frozen in my car, my courage shrinking. What if they turned me away at the door? What if Emily looked at me with cold eyes, the way strangers do? What if my presence ruined her day? But then another thought pushed itself forward. What if I never saw her in a wedding dress, never shared in the joy of her big moment, never got to tell her I loved her before she started a new life? That was a pain I could not carry. So I stepped out of my car, smoothed down my dress, and began to walk. The hall doors were wide open, and guests streamed in with laughter and chatter. I joined the flow, keeping my head high. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked me for a ticket or invitation. It was as though I belonged, and for a brief second I felt almost at peace. Inside, the hall was dazzling. White roses everywhere, golden ribbons tied to the chairs, a long aisle leading up to an arch covered in flowers. My heart squeezed at the sight. I thought of Emily as a little girl, playing with daisies in my garden, weaving them into tiny crowns. And now she was here, about to walk under a grand arch of roses, stepping into her future without me. I found a seat at the back, quiet and out of the way. People were too busy greeting one another to notice me. I could hear snippets of conversation, college friends talking about the bride, distant relatives catching up, laughter echoing in the air. Nobody looked twice at the old woman sitting alone in the corner. I sat with my hands folded on my lap, my pearls cool against my skin, waiting for the ceremony to begin. And then, at last, the music changed. Everyone turned to face the aisle. I rose to my feet along with the crowd, and there she was, Emily. My breath caught in my throat. She looked radiant, her white dress flowing like water, her veil glowing under the soft lights. For a moment, all the hurt and anger melted away, and I felt only pride. That was my granddaughter, the the same little girl I once rocked to sleep, now walking with such grace and beauty. Tears filled my eyes as I whispered to myself, "Oh, sweetheart, you look like a dream." But as she drew closer, her eyes swept over the guests, and then, for the briefest moment, landed on me. Her step faltered. Her smile flickered. I saw the surprise in her face. She hadn't expected me to be there, and in that instant, I knew the real confrontation was coming. When Emily's eyes landed on me, even for just that fleeting second, I could see the shock ripple across her face like a pebble dropped in calm water. She quickly turned her gaze back toward the altar, her arm hooked tightly around the young man walking her down the aisle, but I knew she had seen me. My heart raced, my hands trembled, but I lifted my chin and stood tall, determined not to shrink under the weight of her surprise. The ceremony began, the minister's voice rising above the soft background music, but I could hardly hear his words. My thoughts spun like a whirlwind. Part of me wanted to slip out quietly before anyone confronted me, but another part of me refused to back down. I had come this far, driven all the way, walked into this hall, taken my seat among the crowd. I could not just vanish like an uninvited ghost. When Emily and her groom exchanged vows, I found myself crying quietly, not just tears of joy, though there were some, but tears of sorrow too. Each promise she spoke felt like a door closing, sealing away the little girl who once clung to me, who once said I was her best friend. And yet, through all the pain, I still felt pride. Pride that she had grown into a woman strong enough to stand there, radiant and ready to face life. When the minister finally said, "You may kiss the bride," the hall erupted with applause. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, whistling. I clapped too, though my hands were weak and shaky. My pearls rattled softly against my chest as though echoing my heart. Emily and her new husband walked down the aisle together, smiling, waving at their guests. And then, as they passed the row where I stood, her eyes caught mine again. This time there was no flicker of a smile, no joy, just shock, confusion, and maybe, though I could not be sure, a shadow of guilt. The reception that followed was lively and grand. Tables filled with food, glasses clinking, laughter echoing under the chandeliers. I found a spot at the edge of the room, near the dessert table, as though I could blend into the background. I tasted none of the food. I could barely swallow the water I sipped. My eyes stayed fixed on Emily, who now floated from table to table, her smile broad, her laughter loud, as if to hide the storm beneath. It didn't take long before I noticed my daughter, Emily's mother, walking toward me. Her face was tight, her smile forced. She leaned close, her voice low and tense. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I met her eyes, steady though my insides quivered. "I came to see my granddaughter get married," I said simply. She shook her head, glancing around nervously as though afraid someone would overhear. "You weren't invited." "Emily didn't want." She stopped herself, biting her lip. "You should have stayed home." Those words cut me sharper than a knife. I felt my chest tighten, but I held my ground. "I raised that girl," I whispered. "I changed her diapers. I fed her. I stayed up nights when she was sick. Do you think I could sit at home and pretend this day wasn't happening? I had to be here." My daughter sighed, her shoulders slumping. For a moment, I thought she might soften, might understand. But instead, she muttered, "Just try not to cause a scene. Please." And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing alone, clutching the edge of the table to steady myself. A scene I thought bitterly, as though my very presence was some shameful disruption. I felt like an old ghost haunting a party where everyone else was alive. But then, as the night went on, something unexpected happened. A few people noticed me, not with scorn, but with kindness. An elderly aunt I hadn't seen in years came over and hugged me tightly. "Mary, I'm so glad you're here," she said. "It wouldn't feel right without you." Her words were like a balm on my wounded heart. Later, one of Emily's childhood friends recognized me and came rushing over. "Grandma Mary, I remember all those cookies you used to bake for us after school," she laughed. "It's so good to see you here." For the first time that evening, I smiled genuinely. Perhaps I was not as invisible as I thought. Yet, still, the moment I had been dreading came when Emily finally approached me. Her gown swished softly as she walked, her new husband lingering a few steps behind, watching warily. Emily stopped in front of me, her eyes wide, her lips pressed tightly together. For a moment, she just stared, and I stared back, my breath caught in my chest. Then, in a low, sharp whisper, she said, "Grandma, why are you here?" My heart broke at those words. Not "I'm glad you came," not "I missed you," not even "you look nice." Just "why are you here?" as though I were a stranger intruding on her special day. I swallowed hard, forcing back the tears. "Because I love you," I said. "Because I couldn't let this day pass without seeing you in your wedding dress. I've waited your whole life for this moment." Her eyes flickered, her expression caught between anger and something softer. She shook her head slightly, whispering, "You weren't supposed to come." "I didn't want—" She stopped herself, glancing at her husband. "This is my day." "I know," I said softly, "and that's why I couldn't stay away." For a long moment, she just stared at me. The music and laughter swirled around us, but it felt like the whole world had gone quiet, waiting for what she would say. Emily's silence in that moment felt heavier than any words she could have spoken. Her eyes darted away from mine, down toward the floor, and then back up as though she were wrestling with something inside. I could see her chest rising and falling quickly under her wedding dress, her hands clutching her bouquet so tightly the knuckles went white. I waited, my heart thudding so loudly I thought she might hear it over the music. Finally, she leaned a little closer, her voice trembling though still sharp enough to wound. "Grandma, I didn't invite you because I didn't want any drama today. You always make things about you. I just wanted this one day to be mine." Her words hit me like a storm. For a second, I could not breathe. I opened my mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Me, making things about myself? I thought of all the nights I spent caring for her so her parents could rest, all the times I put my needs aside to give her what she wanted, all the quiet sacrifices I made. And now here she was, accusing me of stealing her spotlight. My throat tightened as tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I swallowed them down. "Emily," I whispered, my voice shaking, "I never wanted to take anything away from you. I just wanted to be here for you like I always have." She looked at me, her eyes flickering with something that looked almost like guilt, but she pressed her lips together and shook her head. I thought it would be easier without you there. Mom said you'd understand." The mention of my daughter stung even more. So it was not just Emily, but her mother too, who had agreed to shut me out. I felt my legs weaken, and I gripped the edge of the dessert table behind me to keep myself from sinking to the floor. "Easier," I repeated softly. "For who? For you? Or for the people who don't want to be reminded of everything I did to keep this family together?" Emily flinched slightly at my tone, but before she could reply, her husband placed a gentle hand on her arm, leaning in to whisper something. She nodded, her eyes never leaving mine, and then she said quietly, "Grandma, I don't want to fight today. Please just go home." My heart broke in that instant. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. After all my hopes of reconciliation, after all the courage it took to come here, she was sending me away. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to pour out all the years of love and sacrifice, but instead I simply nodded, my voice barely audible. "If that's what you want." She turned quickly then, walking back toward the crowd, her husband following close behind. I stood there for a moment, numb, the noise of the party fading into a dull hum in my ears. My daughter glanced at me from across the room, her face filled with a mixture of worry and irritation, as if she were silently telling me, "I told you so." Slowly, I made my way toward the exit. Nobody stopped me this time. Nobody asked where I was going. It was as if I were invisible again, fading into the background of my own family story. Outside, the air was cooler, the desert night sky stretching wide above me, full of stars. I leaned against the side of the building, trying to steady my breathing. My hands shook so badly I could barely reach into my purse for a tissue. Tears slid down my face, hot and unstoppable, as I whispered to the empty night, "How did it come to this? How did I become a burden instead of a blessing?" I thought of my husband then, how he would have been at my side, holding my hand, reminding me that love is never wasted, even if it's not returned. I thought of the little girl who once clung to my neck and told me I was her best friend. Where had she gone? Was she buried somewhere beneath the woman in the white dress, or had she disappeared forever? I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the stars, listening to the muffled music and laughter spilling out from the hall behind me. At one point, a couple of guests walked past, chatting happily, barely noticing me at all. I felt like an intruder in a world that used to belong to me. Finally, I made my way to my car. I sat there for a long time before turning the key in the ignition. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed an old woman with tear-stained cheeks and tired eyes, but also a spark of something else, defiance. They had shut me out, yes. They had made me feel unwanted. But I had not stayed hidden. I had shown up. I had faced them. And for that, I felt a small measure of pride. Driving home, the road stretched endlessly before me, the headlights cutting through the darkness of the desert. I thought about what Emily had said, that I made things about myself. The words burned deep, but the more I turned them over in my mind, the more I realized they came not from truth, but from misunderstanding. I had never wanted to steal her day. All I had wanted was to witness it, to be part of it, to share in her joy. Was that so selfish? By the time I reached my house, the tears had dried on my cheeks, leaving my skin tight and salty. I unlocked the door, stepped into the quiet rooms, and felt the weight of loneliness settle around me like a heavy blanket. The kettle sat on the stove where I had left it, the chair by the window waiting for me, as always. I sank into it, pulling my shawl tighter around my shoulders, and let the silence press in. Yet, even in that silence, a seed of strength took root inside me. They may not want me, but I would not let myself disappear. My story was not over, not yet. That night, after I returned from the wedding, sleep would not come. I sat in my old armchair by the window, the desert wind rattling softly against the panes, and I thought about everything that had happened. The look on Emily's face when she saw me, the sharpness of her words, the cold dismissal that followed. It all replayed over and over in my mind like a cruel record I could not turn off. My chest ached with each memory, but beneath the pain there was also a question that would not leave me. How did we arrive here? How did the bond between grandmother and granddaughter, once so strong, unravel so completely? I thought back to my own youth, to my grandmother who lived in a small adobe house not far from where I grew up. She had been strict, stern at times, but her presence was steady, and though we clashed when I was young, by the time I was grown, I realized how much she had shaped me. I never imagined I would one day be cast aside by my own grandchild. Family, in my mind, was not something you could erase when it was inconvenient. It was roots and soil, a foundation that held you no matter how far you traveled. But it seemed that in this new world, family ties had become thinner, stretched by busy lives, new values, and perhaps even resentment that had never been spoken aloud. I wondered if I had been too present in Emily's life, too much of a voice in her ear when she wanted independence. Perhaps my way of loving, hovering, guiding, sometimes correcting, had made her feel suffocated instead of supported. The thought stung, but it also forced me to reflect. Had I unknowingly made her feel small by always trying to protect her? As I sat there, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea, I realized that love can sometimes be misunderstood. What feels like care to one can feel like control to another. I wanted to believe that Emily loved me still, somewhere deep down, but perhaps she needed distance to claim her own life. Still, did that mean she had to cut me out of the most important day of her life? That seemed too cruel, too final. Over the next few days, I tried to busy myself with little chores, watering the plants on my porch, mending old clothes, baking bread, but my mind always drifted back to the wedding. I imagined Emily and her husband on their honeymoon, smiling and carefree, perhaps not thinking of me at all. The thought twisted my insides. Did she feel relief that I was not truly part of her day? Did she believe I was the problem she had escaped? I didn't know, and the not knowing was its own kind of torment. One afternoon, I pulled out the old photo albums I had kept through the years. Page after page of Emily's childhood smiled back at me. Her first birthday, frosting smeared on her cheeks. Her first day of school, holding my hand tightly. Her high school graduation, wearing the dress I had sewn for her. I traced my fingers over those photographs, tears blurring my vision. "Where did we go wrong, sweetheart?" I whispered to the smiling faces on the page. The house felt unbearably quiet, the kind of silence that echoes. It made me long for voices, for laughter, for connection. I thought of calling Emily, of leaving a message, but fear held me back. What if she didn't answer? What if she answered and the conversation ended with more hurt? I wasn't sure I could bear another rejection. Yet, at the same time, I knew I couldn't sit in silence forever. Love may wound, but it also persists. That is what I told myself as the days stretched on. I began to write in a notebook, pouring out the words I couldn't say to her face. I wrote letters addressed to Emily, letters I never sent. In them, I told her about the night sky I had stared at after leaving her wedding, about the ache in my heart, about the pride I still felt seeing her so beautiful in her dress. I told her stories of when she was little, of the time she clung to me, of the promises I made to always stand by her. Writing those words brought me a strange comfort, as though I were speaking to her in some quiet corner of the universe where she could still hear me. But writing also made me realize something important. I had a choice. I could let this wound define the rest of my days, sitting alone, bitter, waiting for an apology that might never come. Or I could carry on with dignity, holding my love for her close, even if she did not return it in the way I hoped. My husband's voice echoed in my memory then, something he used to tell me when life disappointed us. "Mary, love isn't about being thanked. It's about giving, even when it costs you." Those words stayed with me. Perhaps crashing the wedding had been reckless, but I did it out of love, out of a refusal to vanish. And though it hurt deeply, I also knew I would not regret it. At least I had seen her walk down that aisle. At least I had witnessed the moment I had dreamed of since the day she was born. That was something nobody could take from me. Still, the story was not finished. I had more living to do, and I would not spend what years I had left in silence. I decided in those quiet hours that I would find a way to reach her again, not to demand, not to scold, but simply to remind her of the bond we once shared. Whether she accepted it or not was up to her, but I would not let my love go unspoken. The decision to reach out again was not an easy one. Every part of me feared rejection, the kind that leaves you emptier than before. But as I sat in my quiet house, days turning into weeks, I realized that silence would only harden the distance between us. If I wanted even a chance at healing, I had to take that step. So I began with something small. I bought a wedding card, simple and elegant, with soft roses embossed on the front. Inside, I wrote with trembling hands, "My dearest Emily, I want you to know how beautiful you looked on your wedding day. I am proud of you, and I pray for your happiness every single day. Love always, Grandma." I slipped in a small photograph I had kept for years. Emily as a little girl sitting on my lap, both of us laughing with our heads thrown back. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would look at it and remember the bond we once shared. I mailed it off with a prayer in my heart. Days passed, then weeks with no reply. Each time the mail arrived, my heart would leap, only to sink again when I found nothing from her. Still, I told myself patience was part of love. Perhaps she needed time. One afternoon, my daughter came by. It had been a while since she visited, and I could see the unease in her eyes as she stepped into the kitchen. She glanced at the table where I had laid out another letter I had been writing to Emily but had not yet sent. "Mom," she said, her voice careful, "I know you're still upset about the wedding. Emily, she just wanted things her way. She's young. You have to give her space." I looked at her, my own daughter, and I felt the years between us. Years of misunderstandings, of unspoken resentments. "Space," I repeated softly. I gave her my whole life, and now I'm supposed to give her space? My daughter sighed, sitting across from me. "You're too hard on yourself." She's not angry at you, not really. She thinks you're too involved. She wanted her wedding to be her fresh start. Her words stung, but I held my tongue. I wanted to tell her that being involved was what grandmothers did, that love sometimes looked like showing up even when you weren't wanted. But I could see she had already chosen her side, gently protecting her daughter even if it meant leaving me out. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the unfinished letter. My heart wavered between hope and despair. Should I keep trying or should I let go? The answer came one morning when the phone rang. My hands shook as I picked it up and heard Emily's voice on the other end. It was quiet, hesitant, but unmistakably hers. "Grandma," she said, "I got your card." My breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't speak, afraid that if I did, she might vanish like a dream. "Sweetheart," I whispered finally, "I'm so glad you called." There was a pause, then she sighed. "I wasn't sure if I should. I didn't know how to feel when you showed up at the wedding. I was shocked, and I didn't handle it well." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you," I said. "I didn't mean to. I only wanted to see you on your special day." Her voice wavered. "I know. I know you love me, Grandma. I never doubted that. But I felt like you don't always see me as an adult. Like I'll always be your little girl who needs protecting. Her words pierced me, but they also carried truth. I had held on too tightly, perhaps too long. You're right, I admitted softly. To me, you'll always be that little girl who held my hand and told me I was your best friend. But I promise I'll try to see you as the woman you are now. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, to my relief, I heard her sniffle. I don't want us to fight, Grandma. I love you. I just need you to let me live my life too. My chest swelled with both pain and relief. I understand, sweetheart, I said. I'll give you space. But remember this, no matter how far you go, I'll always be here. My door will always be open. She whispered back, I know, before we said our goodbyes. When I hung up the phone, I sat quietly, my heart both heavy and light. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet, but it was a thread, a fragile bridge stretching across the distance between us. And in that moment, I knew I would hold onto that bridge with all the strength I had left. Love, after all, was not about winning or losing. It was about enduring. After that phone call with Emily, I sat in my chair by the window for a long time, watching the desert sun stretch across the horizon. The house was still quiet, but the silence felt different now. It no longer pressed down on me with the weight of abandonment. Instead, it felt like a pause, a breath before something new. I replayed Emily's words in my mind, her admission that she loved me, her plea for space, her reminder that she wanted to be seen as an adult. They were not the words I had longed to hear, not the full embrace I had dreamed of, but they were honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is better than silence. Over the days that followed, I held back from writing her more letters. My instinct, always, was to pour my heart onto paper, to remind her daily of my love. But I knew now that she needed space, and giving space is its own kind of love. So instead, I wrote in my journal. I filled page after page with memories, prayers, reflections. I wrote about the way the light looked on her wedding dress, the tremble in her voice when she said she didn't want to fight, the sound of her sniffle that reminded me she was still that same little girl beneath it all. Writing became my comfort, my way of keeping her close without holding too tightly. Sometimes, when the loneliness crept in, I would take out the photo albums again. But this time, instead of asking myself where things went wrong, I tried to simply be grateful for the moments we did share. Each picture was proof that love had existed, that it had shaped us both, even if the present was more complicated. My husband's memory walked with me through those days too. I could almost hear him teasing me gently. Mary, you've always been stubborn. You crashed a wedding just to prove you mattered. And you do. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. His words, imagined though they were, gave me strength. Weeks turned into months. Emily did not call often, but every now and then a message would come. Short, simple, but meaningful. A text with a picture from her honeymoon. A quick thinking of you on my birthday. Each one was like a little flame in the dark, enough to warm me, enough to remind me that I was not erased completely. One evening, near Thanksgiving, I was peeling apples for a pie when the phone rang again. It was Emily. This time her voice was steadier, lighter. "Grandma," she said, "we're hosting dinner next week and I'd like you to come." My heart leapt so suddenly I nearly dropped the knife. For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, "Are you sure, sweetheart?" She laughed softly, almost shyly. "Yes, Grandma. I want you there. I think it's time. When I hung up, tears rolled down my cheeks, but this time they were not tears of rejection. They were tears of grace. I knew Thanksgiving would not magically erase all the hurt. There would still be awkward silences, perhaps even unspoken tension. But it was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings are enough. The night of Thanksgiving, I dressed again in that lavender dress, the same one I had worn to the wedding I wasn't invited to. This time, though, I wore it with peace. I arrived at Emily's home with a pie in my hands and a prayer in my heart. She opened the door, smiling, her arms open for a hug. It was not the tight, childlike hug I remembered, but it was warm, real, and full of promise. In that moment, I realized something important. Love does not always follow the story we write in our heads. It bends, it breaks, it heals in ways we don't expect. Sometimes it hurts deeply, but if we choose to keep loving, even in the face of rejection, it can also bloom again in unexpected places. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Emily and I will grow close again, or maybe we will keep our distance, always walking the delicate line between love and independence. But I do know this: I showed up. I refused to disappear. I reminded her and myself that I am still part of her story, and that to me is enough. As I sit now in my chair by the window, the desert stars twinkling above, I feel both the ache of what was lost and the quiet joy of what was regained. Life is never neat, never simple, but love in all its messy, painful, beautiful forms is always worth holding on to. And so, my story is not one of defeat. It is one of persistence, of love that endures even when it is not invited, even when it is misunderstood. I may have crashed a wedding, but what I truly did was crash the silence, the forgetting, the fading away. I reminded my family and myself that grandmothers do not vanish quietly. We love loudly, stubbornly, endlessly, and that is a truth I will carry with me all the days of my life.